Well, thank you, Tim and Matthew, for organising this excellent land management webinar series. And I suppose, Matthew, thank you for kindly volunteering me to participate. Just a few weeks ago, the recently retired head gardener at Highgrove sent me a text saying that she and her husband had found this wonderful word and thought it described me, nemophilist. So I looked up nemophilist, and if you don't know already, it means a person who loves or is fond of woodlands, forests, forest scenery, and who often visits them, a haunter of woods. Well, in that case, I am a self-confessed nemophilist. And certainly when I began this role as head forester for the Duchy of Cornwall some 24 years ago, most of my time was spent managing and whenever possible visiting the Duchy's forests. Over the years, however, and under the inspirational leadership of His Royal Highness, my role with the Duchy has changed. And whilst I still have some 6,000 acres of woodland to keep watch over, some of which you can see on your screen now surrounding Restormal Castle, our office in Cornwall is just below that castle and takes us back to the origins of the Duchy in 1337. But whilst I still have those woodlands to manage, my job these days is far more about creating and maintaining trees in the landscape, or what I like to call a treescape. So rather than speak to you today about the Duchy's approach to woodland management, I'm going to focus on what we are doing to put trees in the wider landscape. Now I could spend the next 10 minutes explaining why having trees in the landscape, why having a treescape is so important. I could explain the role of trees in mitigating climate change, not just carbon sequestration, but carbon substitution, as we use wood and the building blocks of wood, cellulose, lignin, etc., as substitutes for concrete, steel, fossil fuels, conventional plastics, and so forth. I could talk about the benefits of trees to air, water, and soil, to flood mitigation and temperature regulation. I could talk about the immense biodiversity that trees and woodlands support, and increasingly understood by us today, how they greatly benefit us as human beings, our own health and well-being. How many people during this current lockdown are appreciating their local green spaces to a level that they hadn't done before. I am, however, going to take it as read that you don't need enlightening about the many and varied benefits that trees, woodlands, and forests deliver. The issue is, how do we create this urgently needed treescape? And I deliberately use the word urgently, because over the years, there has been a significant loss of trees in the wider landscape. Our nation that is poorly wooded, the result of many centuries of deforestation, is now also losing its non-woodland trees. The combined effects of natural mortality, pests and diseases, catastrophic weather events, and human activity, both development but also intensive farming activity, has greatly diminished our stock of landscape trees. I'm not old enough to remember a landscape pre-Dutch elm disease, but those who are old enough to remember those times, they talk about such dramatic change, such detrimental change to the landscape as a result of that disease. And perhaps my parents-in-law's house name says it all, lost elms. But we are all now living through another similarly tragic episode as our wonderful native ash trees succumb to ash dieback, and think about the effect that is going to have on our landscape. In our businesses, we often talk about succession planning, making sure that the next generation of workers have been planted in our companies and established long enough to succeed those who retire. Such succession planning is, however, sadly lacking when it comes to our treescape. It may just be down to ignorance, given the age trees live to compared to human beings. We just don't realise that there are less there than there used to be. It's the shift in baseline syndrome at work. It may be deliberate. Some people even regarding trees as a costly inconvenience and best removed. Whatever the reasons, action is needed now. For as the proverb goes, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is now. It was in 1980 that the Duchy of Cornwall purchased Hedgerow as a home for His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales. And over the past 40 years, a treescape has most definitely been created there by His Royal Highness. Many, many miles of hedgerows have been planted, all containing hedgerow trees that are carefully protected during hedge laying activities. Garden trees, parkland trees, field trees, roadside trees, avenues and orchards, as well as new woodlands, have created a sylvan landscape where it did not exist before. For His Royal Highness, and thinking back to that proverb, every year is a now year when it comes to tree planting. For His Royal Highness's 70th birthday in 2018, we planted 3 avenues in prominent locations on Duchy lands, one in Cornwall, one near Bath, and one just north of Ross-on-Wye in Herefordshire, the one that's in your image now. It was an interesting and encouraging experience to have a number of people contact the local office as the avenues were being planted, expressing their gratitude that such landscape features were being created. Last year, His Royal Highness celebrated another milestone as Duke of Cornwall. And to mark that occasion, we planted a significant tree near the farmstead on every principal Duchy farm across the whole Duchy. There's no better way to mark a significant event than by the planting of trees. And His Royal Highness, I can assure you, he hasn't managed to visit all of them, but he has been keen to see any of these trees when he's made farm visits over the last 12 months or so. These are just some of the images of the trees that we've planted, perhaps one of my favourite ones here now. During last week's webinar, my colleague Jeremy Clitheroe spoke about the natural capital project that the Duchy is undertaking. And opportunities for tree planting are regularly being identified, as this image now shows you. This is a baseline survey of one of our farms. It shows you the features that are already there. If I move to the next slide, this shows you the sort of opportunities that Jeremy is identifying. And they include hedges, woodlands, hedgerow trees, orchards, wood pasture, parkland, etc. There's great potential to still do more. This autumn, at the behest of His Royal Highness and in delivering elements of our natural capital project, we are embarking on a hedgerow tree planting campaign that will run for several years. And I'm showing you here very honestly some areas of Duchy land that show we desperately still need to do more work. This is a farm in Herefordshire where trees are greatly needed on the landscape. Another image there. It's just not just the rural estate, however, that needs the treescape. Trees play an equally important role in the urban environment. And as the Duchy undertakes development, for instance, at Cambury near Dorchester or Nansledden in Newquay, in your picture now, the green infrastructure is an integral element of the design proposals from the outset. These are sites, this is Newquay here, that's an avenue we planted in Newquay a few years ago. And this is actually now a site near Truro. It's actually a development site, but also a park and ride for the city and contains a Waitrose store. But we have kept the green infrastructure in hand, and we're doing this our work ourselves. Planting trees, planting hedges, to try and beautify the site. There's even an orchard and a woodland being planted on that site. In planning and creating a treescape, there are several factors that need to be taken into account, and I just want to flag up a few now, drawn in part from my own experience to date. Firstly, choosing the location for your trees. As I was drawn into this world of planting non-woodland trees, any naive thoughts I had about the simplicity of the task were, well, they quickly evaporated. Laying out an avenue is really quite difficult, as is planting trees on new development sites and even planting trees in existing hedgerows. Besides the usual site factors that one would think about, soil, water, aspect, exposure, etc., one has to take into account that the farming operation that takes place within that field, the stock that are grazed, the machinery that is used, even the chemicals that might be applied. One has to think about the proximity of possible tree planting locations to properties and roads, the presence of underground and overhead services, the need for visibility at road junctions. We might be trying to create a view, but we might end up blocking a view from a home or a vehicle. So before you start, think, plan, because we want to create beauty, not liability. Secondly, though, selecting the species of the trees. And I don't intend to dwell on this because this is a huge subject, but it is one we need to give serious attention to. The climate is changing, and that doesn't simply mean it's going to be warmer. We are all experiencing these more dramatic, even catastrophic weather conditions. Prolonged dry periods, prolonged wetter periods, sudden storm events. Inextricably linked to this is the issue of tree health. We are currently facing an onslaught from plant pests and diseases, and it's appropriate that I mention this to you today, given that 2020 was designated by the UN as the International Year of Plant Health, although the current human health crisis has understandably stolen the headlines from the plant health crisis that is nevertheless raging. Within the Duchy, we are not wedded to native species only, but nor are we placing our hopes entirely in new introductions. Moderation in all things. Perhaps the key message that I would convey today is the need for species diversity in order to build resilience into our treescape. Some of the avenues we established include 5 different species, quite unusual for avenue planting. We've got at least 18 different native or naturalized species in our plans for our hedgerow tree planting. And linked to all this, be vigilant with regard to biosecurity, especially where you are sourcing your trees from, because we don't want to inadvertently spread another pest or disease across the landscape as a result of our tree planting efforts. Thirdly, don't forget the aftercare of your trees. I'm something of a stuck record when it comes to this matter. Whenever I hear an announcement about some tree planting target, this many trees, that many hectares, I respond, it's not simply about planting the trees. In some ways, that's the easy part. It's the aftercare to ensure that those trees survive and thrive that's critical. How much tree planting that began with good intentions end with bad results. In planning, in costing your tree planting, don't forget the aftercare, especially with these landscape trees, because they are more than likely to be growing in public areas or beside properties, roads, such like. And the need for ongoing maintenance will be greater than in a woodland situation. And then fourthly, communication. Remember to tell people about your trees. Inevitably, such tree planting affects other people. And it's best to have them informed and hopefully enthusiastically involved from the outset. Be aware that the farmer who doesn't really want any more hedgerow trees can do a lot of damage in a very short period of time with a hedge trimmer. The communities that understand why you are planting trees are more likely to protect and cherish them. Location, species, aftercare, communication. There's so much more that I could say on this subject, but I just hope that the above provoked some thought. Planting trees in the landscape does require thought, much thought, but you know, don't think for too long. Because remember, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is now. Thank you.